The challenge of managing used nuclear fuel in an appropriate and acceptable manner requires the very best of science and technology. But it's much more than that. Finding a way forward means going beyond the technical. Any acceptable answer must reflect Canadian values. I guess in many ways we're called upon to develop a contract between science and society.
Nearly everything we do is dependent on electricity. Without it, our economy would grind to a halt. Our quality of life could not be supported. However it's produced, electricity impacts our environment. Whether it's greenhouse gases emitted when we burn coal and oil, huge land masses flooded or rivers diverted for hydroelectric projects, or the toxic chemicals that are used in the manufacture of solar panels and batteries. Proponents tell us that nuclear electricity doesn't pollute the atmosphere, but it does pose real challenges. It creates dangerous radioactive byproducts that must be managed safely, isolated from humans and the environment for a very long time. Hello, I'm Stephanie Brochard. In Canada, as elsewhere, humankind has come to understand the importance of protecting our Earth, our environment, and ourselves. With that understanding has come recognition of our responsibility to manage the wastes we produce. In countries which enjoy the benefits of nuclear power, responsibilities include managing the used fuel that results from its generation. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization was set up in 2002 by Canada's 3 nuclear energy corporations, as they were required to do by the Nuclear Fuel Waste Act. The NWMO's task is to develop and recommend to the Government of Canada a strategy for managing used nuclear fuel over the long term. In accord with the polluter pays principle, the Nuclear Fuel Waste Act also required Ontario Power Generation, Hydro-Quebec, New Brunswick Power, and Atomic Energy of Canada to establish trust funds to ensure that money will be available to pay for long-term, high-level nuclear waste management. The funds are in place and receiving annual contributions. An independent advisory council has been created to act as a guarantor of the public interest as the NWMO conducts its study. Chaired by the Honourable David Crombie and composed of distinguished Canadians, the Council's comments on the NWMO study and the way the organization discharges its responsibilities will be made public. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization has committed to collaborating with Canadians to deliver a recommendation that is socially acceptable, environmentally responsible, technically sound, and economically feasible. The NWMO developed its work plan after a series of conversations with Canadians about their expectations for the study and how they would like to be included in the work. Elizabeth Dowdswell is president of the organization.
We intend to mine the lessons of the past, to examine the present, and imagine the future in our quest for answers. But most importantly, we need Canadians to participate. We want First Nations people, scientists, industry, individuals, and communities to reflect on this issue and to help guide us. We know that citizens expect and deserve to be involved in finding solutions to important public policy questions. And so our conversations with Canadians have already shaped our study plan. We intend to keep people informed of our thinking at every stage of our work.
Nuclear fuel has been generating electricity in Canada for more than 30 years. Total installed capacity is more than 15,000 megawatts. Even with several of Ontario's 20 reactors not currently operating, nuclear still accounts for as much as 35% of power in the province. One reactor supplies New Brunswick with 30% of its electricity, and another looks after 2.5% of Quebec's needs. This is a CANDU nuclear fuel bundle. it can generate 1 million kilowatt hours of electricity, enough to power 100 homes for a year. 85,000 of these fuel Canadian nuclear generating units each year. And when they've done their job, they need to be managed for a very long period of time. After 12 to 18 months in a reactor, the fuel bundles are removed using remotely controlled equipment. They are stored in water-filled pools to cool and shield them until their heat and radioactivity decline. After about 7 to 10 years in water storage, the bundles have cooled sufficiently to be transferred to dry storage. If all of Canada's existing reactors operate to the end of their currently projected lives, estimates are that they will produce about 3.6 million used fuel bundles. By the end of December 2002, almost 1.7 million had already been accumulated. To give a sense of their volume, all of them stacked end to end and piled closely together like cordwood to the top of the boards would fit into 5 standard hockey rinks. Used nuclear fuel is safely stored at all of Canada's nuclear generating stations in closely monitored interim facilities licensed by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Ontario Power Generation operates both wet and dry storage facilities. Used fuel bundles from its Pickering and Darlington stations are managed at the plant sites just east of Toronto. The company is also responsible for waste it produced when it operated the Bruce generating stations, and it has a continuing arrangement to care for fuel used by Bruce Power, the company which now leases those units. Hydro-Quebec, owner of the John T. 2 reactor, has both wet and dry storage facilities at the plant near Trois-Rivières. And the same is true for NB Power, which operates the similarly sized Point Lepreau nuclear generating station in New Brunswick. Other used fuel is stored at Atomic Energy of Canada Limited test and research facilities located at Whiteshell Labs in Manitoba, Chalk River Laboratories near Deep River, Ontario, a waste management facility adjacent to the closed Douglas Point reactor in Kincardine, Ontario, and the defueled John T. 1 site in Quebec. Small amounts of nuclear fuel waste are produced at university research reactors in Edmonton, Saskatoon, Hamilton, Kingston, Montreal, and Halifax. Many of these facilities are used to test engineering materials and designs and to produce medical isotopes used in the diagnosis and treatment of diseases. So, how should Canada manage the used nuclear fuel we have already accumulated and continue to produce?
Our founding legislation actually requires us to study 3 technical methods: deep geological disposal, centralized storage, either above or below ground, and storage at the reactor sites themselves. We can also, of course, look at other methods if they seem appropriate. But what's important is that the legislation also recognizes that an assessment of technical methods is only one part of the job. The legislation requires us to recommend an appropriate management approach, and that means that we have to integrate ethical, social, environmental, and economic considerations into any assessment that we do.
When people look at the options, 3 technical methods emerge, each with multiple variations and each with its own advantages and disadvantages. One approach would be to dispose of it forever. Another might be to store it, leaving future options open. And some people suggest treating or reprocessing the material. Disposal is a way of isolating used nuclear fuel from humanity and the environment for all time. There is no intention of retrieval or reuse. The method most studied and being pursued in several countries is disposal in geological repositories deep below the ground's surface. Advocates of disposal contend that engineered barriers and the geology surrounding them act together to slow down the movement of radionuclides. This is often seen as a way to protect society and the environment without the need for direct human management. One of the big questions about deep geological disposal is that no one knows for certain what will happen to the used fuel long after it's buried. How long will the engineered and natural barriers hold up? Will the hazard seep into the groundwater? Could it reach drinking water? Other disposal methods have been considered over the years, but things like shooting the waste into space, placing it in ice sheets, or on the seabed are not being implemented anywhere and are not the focus of any significant research. Storage is a management option that allows retrieval. Storage methods rely on engineered barriers for radiation protection. Some proposals suggest above-ground storage, others below ground. Used fuel could be stored at a central location or in several places, and it could utilize a variety of types of containers, vaults, or caverns that could be changed or upgraded periodically. Because storage allows for retrieval, future societies would have the opportunity to use the material if that was found to be desirable. Or they could apply better practices to its management if they were developed. But storage has its own issues. Among other things, a system would have to be created that would require management by future generations. We would have to consider whether political and social systems will continue to function for as long as the used fuel will remain hazardous. Treating or reprocessing used nuclear fuel has been done in several other countries since the 1950s, but it is a technology that Canada has not developed. Although reprocessing could reduce the amount of waste, it is an expensive process and it raises concerns about nuclear proliferation. A related process called transmutation is aimed at actually destroying and stabilizing radioactive isotopes. It is the subject of research in some countries, but is not now a practical reality. Clearly, there are no easy answers to how Canada should manage its used nuclear fuel over the long term. Only a wide range of difficult questions and issues for Canadians to address together. We need to explore where we stand on things like whether we should bring all of our used nuclear fuel together to one location, or is it better to have smaller quantities at a number of different locations? What types of institutions and rules and regulations are needed to ensure used fuel is safely managed? How do we ensure that there will be enough money now and in the future to pay for the management of used fuel? Can we rely on future societies to monitor and guard a waste facility, or should we design one that doesn't need to be watched? How can we know what society will be like in 1,000 years or 10,000 years? Will social systems continue to function? How far into the future does our generation's responsibility extend? And what about the environment? Does the management approach ensure its long-term integrity?
The management approach that Canada accepts must be an integrated system that is capable of standing the test of time. First and foremost, our recommendation must protect human and environmental health and security. But it must also give Canadians confidence that there are institutions and a set of laws and regulations in place that will continue to examine the risk, that will monitor those risks and report back to us, that will make the necessary resources available, and that, of course, will allow people to be part of the process.
The long-term management of Canada's used nuclear fuel isn't a matter for just scientists and engineers. Of course, they will play an important role, but the right answers rest with a much broader constituency. When it comes to deciding the ethical and social values to be applied to nuclear waste management, everyone's judgment is valid. That is why the NWMO invites and welcomes all interested Canadians to participate in this very important public policy discussion. Interested Canadians can learn more by visiting the NWMO website at www.nwmo.ca. Comments are welcomed by mail at the organization's offices, by toll-free telephone, or by email.